Are you spending hours trying to debug your application due to an unexpected data type? If you're anything like me, exceptions became the rule instead of the exception. Well, starting right now, it's time to take back control. It's time for Pydantic. So Pydantic is a data validation library for Python. It has a couple key features. The first one being data validation. Pydantic ensures that the data you're expecting matches the data in the type hints of your Python application, which really means if you're expecting a string, you're going to get a string, and if someone tries to pass in an int, the application will fail and raise an exception. The second key feature is data parsing, which means you are automatically going to be able to convert the data into data that you can use within your application. So think of it as an API request comes in and it's all text. We can change and convert that into a Python object. Pydantic is a key component into modern Python applications. So let's dive in and check out the main features of Pydantic. So here's a fast API application. Now fast API uses Pydantic automatically. It's embedded within the framework of fast API. So I thought that would be the best way of displaying the power of Pydantic. So I already have Pydantic imported using the base model. This is all fast API application stuff outside the Pydantic words. So let's go ahead and say we just have a class of user create, which takes in Pydantic. So this is just going to be the initial foundation of Pydantic in our application. The user create has an email of type string, password of type string, and then we have a class user, which inherits our user create that just has a UUID. Now, this application is a post request where we just pass in a user of user create. So it's just gonna be the email and password. And then we're just gonna be returning that user where we hard code the UUID and then we pass in the email and the password that we get from the request. So let's just see this application first, and then we will go ahead and add Pydantic features to it. So to start, if we just have this Swagger documentation and we just wanna call the post request to our application, we can open this up and say, hey, we wanna call this create user request, which takes in an email of string and password of string. And if we said we wanted to try it out, we can type anything we want here with just a random couple characters for each. And then we can say execute, where we are going to get a successful 201 of HTTP created with an email of YPU, a password of this, and a UUID that we statically added. Now, if you ask me, this is not that great. A email just can't be 3 characters. A password like this might work. We might want to say that it needs some symbols or numbers. Off the top of my head, this works because we only have one user, but if we went ahead and created another user, we have this statically added. So we need something that's going to make this UUID a little bit more dynamic. So let's go back to our IDE and let's add some Pydantic features. The first one we're going to add is to the password. So we can go ahead and in this area of from Pydantic import base model, let's go ahead and just say we want to add field and then save our application. Well, what field allows us to do is add some very brief data validation to our data that we're passing in using the request. So what I mean by this is the password can be any amount of characters right now, and we want there to be a minimum of 5 characters and a maximum of 12 characters. So here we can say equals field, and inside the parentheses, we can say minimal length of equals to 5 and max length equals 12. Just this change will already start adding some data validation to our classes that we're getting from the request. So if we open up our application again and we just refresh the page, let's say, and say try it out, and our password, let's go ahead and just type in 3 characters, ERY. If we try to execute this, we are going to get an error. And this error is going to even have a message that says string should be at least 5 characters with string too short. So we're already implementing some kind of data validation within our application by just implementing the field from Pydantic, which says that the minimal length must be 5 and the maximum length can be 12. So just to test out the maximum length, if we just keep adding things until we believe it's over 12 characters and we click execute, we're gonna get the exact same thing of string too long should be at most 12 characters. So this is working for the initial data validation for our application. All right, let's go back to our Visual Studio And inside here, we can see that we now have field implemented on at least the password. But one thing that we see is that we have our UUID statically being added. Now, this is something that we don't want the request to do. We want Pydantic to handle this automatically. So to do this, we can use the default factory, and that is part of the field. So we can say equals field, and inside here, we want to pass in the default factory of UUID4. After doing this, we can just remove this complete static ID. And now let's go back to our applications browser. So if we come back here and we refresh the page, because that's from the last one, this should work just string on both of them, and we click execute. We can see that we get a 201 with the email passing, data validation with string, password also passing, and now our ID of our UUID starts with an F and ends with 247. If we click execute again, we can see that the UUID changes each time. And now what the default factory allows us to do is generate some kind of data before the object is created. And in this fact, we are generating a new UUID each time a new user create is passed through as a request. All right, now let's go ahead and say we want to add a new field to our user create. And this is going to be an age, and we'll say of type int. Let's go ahead and say for a field, we want to add some restrictions. Well, min length and max length are based on the characters of password. So we're talking about a string, and we're validating the amount of characters within that string. Well, using an int, instead of using min length and max length, we can use greater than and less than. So we can say that you must be greater than 12 to use this application. So that means you're 13, you have to be greater than 12. But let's also, just for fun, throw in you must be less than 100. For some reason, this application is 13 to 99 only. So this will work, but there's going to be a little twist to it, but let's find that out in a second. If we save this application and we go back to our browser and we just refresh the page, we can see that age starts off at 0. Let's go ahead and change that to 20 to pass our data validation and click execute. Well, when that happens, we get an error, and that error is to be expected. That's the trick up the sleeve that I just mentioned. And the reason that's happening is we're expecting an age, well, we're passing in an age, but we're not converting the new user to have this age. So when we create this user has as an age, that request gets passed in, but when we want to use the actual user within our application, it no longer has an age. So the quick fix is we can just say age equals user.age. This would fix our problem. But there is a better way of doing this in Pydantic, and it's called model dump, which means we are going to dump all of the data from the request into the Python object we're trying to create. So this is a good way if there's only like one or maybe two fields within the object. But what if we have multiple developers and they just keep adding to our user create? I mean, user create could have address, it could have country, phone number, zip code, it could have so much information. Well, a quick way of doing this is we can just remove all of these fields and just say user.modelDump. This means everything that we get from our user create request, we're just gonna dump that into our Python object of user. So if we go back to our application and we refresh, we can say try it out, change age to 20, click execute, and we still get an error. Well, if we go back to our application, what we need to do here with the user.modelDump is just add 2 stars in front. The 2 stars in front means we're gonna pass in all of the arguments. So now that we're gonna pass in all of the arguments, if we go ahead and say execute, we're gonna get it HTTP 201 with the email string, password string, age 20 with a random UUID. All right, so now that we're getting closer, let's go ahead and add a JSON schema. Now, a JSON schema means that right here in the very beginning where our email says string, our password says string, and our age says 0, we can change that data so the user won't be surprised on what they're running into. Now, we can do that using a JSON config from the class config. So right under here, let's go ahead and say class config, where we want to create a new JSON schema extra. Now, for example, right here, we created our new class config, which is inside the class user create. We have our JSON schema extra, where we're saying this is going to be an example, so it's going to be an example user for our application. We want the email to be test@email.com. We want the password to be test1234 ! With the age of 65. So if we save this application and now go back to our browser, we can see that this example data is now age 65, email test@email.com, and a password test1234 ! Now, if you don't already see how much Pydantic can influence and add data parsing and data validation to our application, this thing allows you to be able to accelerate your application by so much. Now, another thing we can do is field validation. So on the end of field, we can say field validator. Now, we already have our normal field, which is min length, max length, greater than, less than. But what if we want to add a little bit more validation that's not as simple as counting the characters or checking the conditional of a number? Well, what we can do here is add a field validator. So right under our config, so still within the class of user create, we can say @field validator, and we want this to be on our password. So here we're saying this field validator is going to be part of our password. And now we can say def password validator, where we pass in our class and a value. And now we can just make sure that the user just doesn't submit the default value. So let's go ahead and just say if value is equal to test1234 ! Well, then we want to raise a value error where we're going to say, please do not use default password. And we can say ... because for obvious reasons. If it doesn't and we do pass the value, well, then we can just return the value. If we save this and we go back to our browser and we refresh, if we say try it out, execute, well, we're gonna get a value error. Please do not use default password of ... based on what we just created, which was the field validator for our password field, where we're saying it cannot be equal to test1234 ! Now, there's one more thing that we can really do, and it's adding some validation to our email. Right now, our email is just a string and it accepts pretty much everything. So what we can do is just, let's cancel out of our application real quick and say pip install email validator. And let's press enter. Now, what this did was installed a new Pydantic mini package that will allow us to be able to validate emails super easily. So what we can say is now from Pydantic, we want to add our email string. And now from here, we can say just equals our email string. So now if we go ahead and restart our application and we go back to our browser, if we say try it out and we remove, for example, that @ that a lot of emails have, and we try and execute, we can see that we're gonna get an error. Oh, well, that's the first one, that's the one that we created of do not use our default password. So I'm gonna change it to 2 ! And then click execute. Well, immediately we can see that it does work right now. So let's go ahead and just make this a little bit worse by saying we want it to just be test EMA execute. Let's see if we're getting any type of error here. Let's close and let's restart this application. Oh, okay, so it went through because it's not equals email string, that email string is the type. So right here, we just want to change it from a string to email string. All right, so let's try this again and refresh. And now if we say try it out and we remove this @ and maybe this dot, and then we say execute. There we go, we're actually getting 2 errors this time. The first one saying we are not passing in a valid email, and the second one being our personal validation that we added to our password. Now, I hope this helped you just be able to understand the power of Pydantic and how awesome it is and how much it can just speed up data validation and data parsing within your own application. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.